Most folks in that stretch of the high plains believed nothing good ever came after midnight. The wind turned sharp, coyotes cried too close, and the old wagon trail fell so quiet a person could hear their own heartbeat. Yet that was the hour she chose to start walking, her small lantern swinging at her side as she made her way toward the far valley, where the land opened wide and the stars felt almost close enough to touch. She had taken the midnight job because it was the only work offered to her in weeks, but there was more to it than the promise of wages. Something in that quiet hour felt safer to her than the noise of daylight, as if darkness gave her space to breathe. She was tired of roaming from one ranch to another, asking if anyone needed a hand. Folks could be kind, but kindness had limits, and winter was coming down the mountains faster this year. She needed a place, a task, something steady enough to keep her mind from drifting back to what she had lost. So when she heard a traveler mention that a solitary Apache man up in the valley needed help with work no one else wanted, she decided that was where her boots would go. People whispered about him whenever his name came up around campfires or in the small trading post. Some said he lived alone by choice. Others claimed he kept to the far hills because he carried too much grief. A few hinted they had seen a light burning in some hidden cabin he kept tucked somewhere. The forest swallowed sound. No one seemed to know the truth, and she didn't ask many questions. A job was a job. And every winter she had survived proved that a person gained nothing by letting stories scare them. The wind brushed her coat and made the lantern flame dance. Up ahead, the trail dipped into darkness, where the tall pines leaned over the path like watchmen. She gripped the handle tighter. The moon hung low, pale and cold, but there was something steady in its glow, something that felt like guidance. She breathed slow and kept moving, hoping the man she was walking toward would not turn her away the way so many others had. The valley felt different from the world she had left behind. The land stretched wide, wild and quiet, as if the earth there held its breath. The night carried the scent of pine needles and snow touched with smoke. It meant someone had a fire burning somewhere. Maybe it was his. Maybe he expected her. Maybe he didn't. She wasn't sure which thought made her more uneasy. When she reached the ridge, she paused and lifted her lantern. Down below, a faint orange glow flickered between the trees, too steady to be lightning and too warm to be the moon. She hesitated, wondering if she should call out, but the wind carried her voice away. So she stepped forward, one slow step after another, following that small light like a traveler following a promise. As she neared the clearing, she saw him standing near a half-finished timber frame, his tall shape outlined by firelight. He didn't turn at first, but she sensed he knew she was there. He carried himself with the calm strength of a man who understood the land better than he understood people. The fire cast a warm line along his jaw and caught the dark braid that hung over his shoulder. His posture spoke of someone who had spent years in silence but had not grown bitter from it. She stopped a few paces back, unsure how close she should go. Before she could speak, he finally turned. His eyes met hers, steady but not unkind. He looked at her lantern, then at her boots dusted from miles of trail, and then at her face as if trying to decide why someone like her would be walking through the valley at such a late hour. He asked if she had come for the job. His voice was low, calm, and carried the weight of someone who spoke only when needed. She nodded, aware that her heartbeat had quickened. He studied her again, not in a way that made her shrink back, but like a man making sure she had not been forced or tricked into coming. Then he motioned for her to step closer to the fire. The warmth felt good on her hands, and she held them near the flames before she realized he was watching her again, waiting for her to speak. She explained she needed work and had been told he might need help with something important. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a piece of timber and set it aside. As if making space for her in the quiet, he said he needed someone who was not afraid of long hours or quiet nights. She told him she had enough silence inside her to last a lifetime. Something softened in his expression, almost too faint to see, but it was there. He stepped away from the fire and motioned for her to follow him toward the dark edge of the clearing. She hesitated before walking after him. The pines creaked overhead, and somewhere far off, an owl gave a slow call. The path he took was narrow, but he walked it with the ease of someone who knew every stone and root. She kept her lantern high, though he moved without one. After a short walk, it came to a small open space, tucked between boulders and trees thicker than the ones near the clearing. She almost gasped. There, hidden away from sight, stood a cabin. Not old, not abandoned. A newly built cabin, small but strong, made with care. Smoke drifted from a chimney pipe, carrying the warm scent of cedar. It didn't look like any work site she had imagined. It looked lived in, prepared, waiting for something. Or someone. He stopped a short distance from the door and let her take in the sight. She looked at the cabin, then at him, wondering why anyone would build something like this so deep in the valley. Before she could ask, he said no one knew about the cabin except him. No traders. No ranchers. Not even the folks in the post who liked to whisper. He built it away from all eyes because he believed some things were meant to grow in quiet places. His words puzzled her. She asked what this had to do with the job he wanted her to do. He didn't answer at first. He looked at the roof, then at the ground, as if choosing his next words with care. He told her he had built the cabin for a purpose he didn't speak of to anyone. A purpose he had waited a long time to face. A purpose he had finally accepted only a short while ago. She felt something shift in the air, something serious enough to make her hold her breath. Then he turned to her with a calm expression she couldn't read. He said the job she came for was not only about helping him, it was about deciding if she would stay here in the valley long enough to understand why the cabin existed at all. Her lantern flickered, and the tiny flame wavered as if reacting to the sudden change in the wind. She realized then she stood at the edge of something she did not understand and could not walk away from easily. Before she could respond, he gently pushed open the cabin door. A warm glow spilled out into the dark, revealing a space filled with things that did not belong to a man who lived alone, things chosen with care. A quilt folded neatly. A simple table set for two. A second chair placed as if someone had expected her long before she arrived. Her heart tightened. Something in the back of her mind warned her this job was not what she thought. Something deeper was at play. He stepped aside and motioned her in. She froze at the threshold, staring into the cabin built by a man she had never met until tonight. A cabin that seemed made for her long before she walked into the valley, and right as she was about to step in, a distant sound echoed through the trees, sharp enough to stop her breath. A warning, or a sign. She didn't know which. She stood at the doorway, half in the glow of the warm cabin and half in the cold breath of the night. That echo rolling through the trees still lingered in her ears, sharp enough to send a chill along her arms. She looked toward the dark forest, trying to understand whether the sound had come from some distant coyote or from something much closer. The Apache man looked the same direction, though his face barely shifted. His stillness told her the sound mattered more to him than he wanted to show. He finally said the forest carried messages for those willing to hear them. His quiet tone carried no fear, but something more watchful. She asked if it was something she should worry about. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped to the side of the cabin and checked the shadowed tree line. Slow and steady, like a man who lived by reading every movement in the land, she stayed near the doorway, her lantern in her hand, though the warm cabin pulled at her like a safe harbor. She wondered why the small cabin had been built in a place so hidden, why the path to it twisted behind thick walls of pine, why the ground around it held no wagon marks, no footprints except his. Every piece of this place felt chosen with care, yet she felt unprepared for the reasons behind it. He returned to her and said, the sound belonged to the land, not to danger. She didn't know if that was meant to ease her, or if he simply didn't want to frighten her off. Still, something in his calm voice steadied her steps. She finally crossed the threshold into the cabin. Inside, the room felt warmer than she expected. The air carried the faint smell of cedar and herbs. A small stove glowed red near the wall, giving the place a soft warmth that settled into her bones. She scanned the room slowly, her eyes catching on details she couldn't ignore. The second chair by the table? the folded quilt, a small shelf with 2 clay cups. None of it looked like something a solitary man prepared for himself. She turned to him and asked how long he had been building this place. He said the cabin took time because he only worked on it when the land allowed it. Storms, hunting, and travel had slowed him, but he had finished it earlier than he expected. She waited for him to explain why he built it at all. But he didn't. His silence made the walls feel even closer. She asked again what kind of help he needed, what the midnight job truly was. He studied her face, then said he would explain, but only if she understood the valley came with rules. She nodded, though she didn't know what those rules might be. He told her some land didn't welcome strangers unless the land itself chose them. She wasn't sure what that meant. The way he said it made her skin prickle. He leaned against the table and folded his arms, his eyes steady on her. He told her she had walked into a place most folks avoided because they feared what they imagined. Outsiders saw this valley as a place where stories twisted into superstition. They believed the Apache who lived here was hiding from something or guarding something dangerous. None of them ever asked what truth lay under those stories. She asked him what the truth was. He shook his head and said truth came in pieces, not all at once, and only to those who earned it. She didn't press further because she sensed he wasn't refusing her. He was protecting something he carried. She placed her lantern on the table and rubbed her cold hands together. The long walk had taken more out of her than she realized. Her legs ached, her breath felt stiff in her chest, and hunger pulled at her. He noticed her tiredness and motioned for her to sit. She sat in the chair closest to the stove. The warmth seeped into her shoulders and eased some of her nerves. He reached into a small wooden box by the stove and handed her a piece of warm cornbread. She ate slowly, grateful for something soft and comforting. He didn't sit, but moved around the cabin with quiet steps, adjusting a few things, checking the fire, and making sure the windows were latched. She watched him, trying to understand who he was beyond the stories people whispered. When she finished eating, he finally spoke again. He told her the job he needed help with wasn't something he could do alone anymore. He explained he had spent years tending to this valley, keeping trails clear, gathering herbs, watching over the animals that moved across the open land. But there was something else he needed help with. Something that involved the cabin. She asked what exactly he wanted her to do. He said she would have to stay in the valley through the season if she agreed to help. The thought surprised her. She had expected the job to be simple, maybe a few days of cleaning or gathering firewood. Staying in the valley for a whole season felt heavy. It's almost like a promise she wasn't ready to make. She asked why him, of all people, she should trust with such a request. He didn't take offense. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out into the dark trees. His voice calm as he said that trust was a choice made by both sides, and she didn't owe him anything yet. Then he added something that made her breath catch. He said he built the cabin not just for someone to stay in, but for someone who needed a place to begin again. His words hit her unexpectedly. She had been drifting for months, moving from ranch to ranch, carrying the weight of choices she wished she could undo. She came to this valley hoping for any work at all. Yet now she stood in a place someone had built with purpose. A place that felt like a fresh start, waiting quietly in the pine shadows. She asked how he knew she needed that. He said he didn't know until she appeared at his fire, but the land often whispered before a person understood the reason. She wasn't sure how to respond. Something about his calm certainty made her chest feel lighter, though she didn't know if she was ready to accept what he offered before she could say anything. Another echo traveled through the forest, softer than before, but still enough to make her lift her head. He heard it too. This time he stepped outside without a word. She followed him into the cold air. The wind carried the scent of pine and something faint beneath it. Something that smelled like smoke from a distant place. He scanned the valley with quiet focus. She stood beside him, holding her coat tight around her. She asked if someone else lived nearby. He replied that the valley wasn't empty, but not all neighbors revealed themselves easily. She didn't know if he meant people or animals. His vague answers only deepened the mystery around him. They stood in silence until the wind settled. He turned back toward the cabin and said the land was restless tonight, but it would calm soon. She wasn't sure if she believed that, yet she followed him inside, the warmth wrapped around her again as the door closed. She looked at the quilt, the cups, the table, the chair waiting for someone who hadn't arrived until now. Everything felt too deliberate, too prepared. She asked him directly why he built a cabin for someone he had not met yet. His eyes held hers, steady and honest, and he said sometimes a man knew before he understood. Sometimes the land showed him what needed to be done long before the moment arrived. His answer made her heart quicken in a way she tried to ignore. She wasn't ready for whatever meaning lay behind his words. She wasn't ready to face the idea that this place, hidden between stone and pine, might have been waiting for her. She stood and walked around the small room, letting her fingers brush the wooden walls as she tried to ground her thoughts. Every board felt sturdy, every corner crafted with care. There were no signs of rush, no signs of wasted effort. Whoever this man was, he didn't build things without reason. She turned back to him and said she needed to understand what he expected from her before she agreed to anything. He nodded slowly as if he had been waiting for her to ask that. He said he would tell her everything, but before he explained the full truth, she needed to know one thing. She needed to know the valley was safer for her than the world she came from. She felt her breath tighten. He spoke as if he knew something about her past, though she had told him nothing. She asked what he meant. He didn't answer. He simply pointed at the quilt folded on the bed and said she could rest tonight. In the morning, he would tell her why the cabin existed, why she had been chosen by the land to walk into it, and why the midnight job she came for would change more than the coming season. She stared at him, trying to understand his calm certainty. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying another faint echo through the valley, softer but persistent, like a warning that refused to fade. And standing in the warm glow of the cabin made for her before he had ever seen her face, she felt the first true spark of fear and curiosity mixed together in her chest. Whatever waited for her in this valley had already begun. She lay awake long after he settled near the stove in the other room. The cabin might have been warm, but her thoughts were cold and restless. Every time she started to drift, the valley reminded her it was not a quiet place. The wind hissed through the pines. Branches scraped against one another. A distant owl called out in steady rhythm. More than once she thought she heard that strange echo again, faint and low, like a sound that belonged to someone watching from the dark hills. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and stared at the low ceiling. The small cabin felt both safe and unfamiliar, like a borrowed coat that fit but still carried another person's memory. Her mind kept circling back to the words he had spoken. The valley is safer for you than the world you came from. How could he know what the world had been like for her? He had not seen the ranch where she had last worked, had not watched the way the foreman's eyes followed her, the way the owner's smile sharpened when he reminded her of debt she never asked for. Back there, promises came with chains. Out here, promises sounded like trees and wind and the steady voice of an Apache. Man who built a cabin for someone he had never met? She turned on her side and tried to quiet her thoughts. Memories rose anyway. The last ranch had been loud and full of men who spent their days arguing about cattle prices and land they wanted to fence. She had done the laundry, cooked simple meals, swept long porches, and tried to stay invisible. That worked until the owner grew tired of his own troubles and decided she was part of his solution. When she refused him, his kind tone turned cold. He reminded her she still owed him for food and boots he claimed he had advanced on her behalf. Every kindness became a number he pressed into her like a brand. The night she left that place, she had taken only what she could carry. The cook had slipped her a small sack of biscuits and told her to keep walking and not look back. She followed the old trail toward the trading post, hoping to vanish among strangers. That was where she heard a traveler mention the solitary Apache in the valley, who might pay for help no one else would take. At the time, she thought only of wages and distance. She had not expected to find a cabin standing like a silent promise between stone and pine. Sometime before dawn, she finally slept. When she woke, the first light was curling through the small window, pale and soft, painting the room in gray. She heard the quiet clang of metal and the low thump of wood being set down. The Apache man moved with the same calm she had seen the night before. He glanced over when she sat up, then nodded toward the small basin by the wall. There was warm water in it, steam drifting in the chilly air. He said morning came early in the valley, and work followed soon after. His tone was plain, not sharp, but it carried the weight of someone used to long days. She washed her face, pulled her boots on, and stepped outside with him. The valley looked different under daylight. The shadows that had seemed threatening at night now revealed tall pines and open rock faces with streaks of red and gold. The cabin sat tucked against a line of boulders, sheltered from the worst of the wind. From where she stood, she could see a narrow stream farther down, shining like a thin silver thread. The land felt wide, yet the path they had taken was hidden from anyone who did not know where to look. He pointed to the ridge beyond the stream and told her that was where the echo had come from. Scouts favored that height. She asked what they were scouting for. He answered by talking about the people who lived beyond the valley instead. He said the ranchers on the far side of the hills had been pushing their fences closer every season. Some of them wanted the stream, some wanted the timber, and some wanted control over whatever they did not understand. There had been talk of a new road that would cut near Apache land, maybe even a line for wagons and freight that would turn quiet trails into busy routes. He said not all settlers were cruel, but enough of them forgot that this land had belonged to others long before their maps gave it new names. She listened in silence, feeling the old ache of being caught between worlds. She was no part of his people, yet she knew what it was to be pushed aside. He spoke of old agreements made with army men who never came back, of promises written on papers that no one in his family had signed. He said the valley had become a place where he watched to see which way the wind would turn, whether peace still had a chance, or whether trouble was already riding toward them. She asked again what any of that had to do with her. Her voice came out sharper than she meant. He did not flinch. He said the cabin held part of that answer. They spent the morning walking the land. He showed her the narrow paths that wound between stone formations, the hidden places where herbs grew wild, and the clearings where deer passed through at dusk. He spoke of the valley as if it were a living thing, breathing and listening. She felt small and strangely useful at the same time. Here, every step meant something. Every footprint marked a choice near midday as they crossed the stream on a flat rock. He finally gave her another piece of the truth. Riders had been seen near the outer ridge the week before, he said. Not Apache riders. Men from the ranch country. He had watched them from a distance. They studied the land like men looking at a prize they meant to claim. One of them, he said, spoke a name she recognized as soon as it left his lips. The owner of the last ranch she had fled. Her chest tightened. She felt as if the air had thinned around her. She asked him slowly how he knew that name. He said the wind carried words further than most people believed, and scouts carried the rest. One of his cousins had listened as the riders argued around their campfire. The rancher wanted more land, and someone had told him the valley might be easy to take if its keeper stood alone. That same man had also mentioned a woman who owed him. She looked away, staring hard at the stream as if she could force her reflection to disappear. Shame and anger mixed inside her, hot and heavy. She had hoped the rancher would be glad to be rid of her. Instead, he had followed her with threats she had not heard, and deals she had not agreed to. She turned to the Apache man and asked why he would take in a stranger who carried this kind of trouble on her heels. His answer surprised her. He said trouble was coming to the valley whether she was there or not. The ranchers wanted the land long before they knew her name. He believed the cabin and her arrival were part of the same story, not the cause of it. She struggled to trust that. Part of her wanted to leave at once, to walk away before her past burned his home. Another part of her knew there was nowhere left to go. If the rancher meant to push his claim this far, distance would not be enough. Later that day, as they gathered firewood, a second threat of conflict showed itself. They were loading cut branches onto a small sled when a figure appeared at the edge of the trees. It was an older Apache woman, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp as flint. She wore a woven shawl and carried herself like someone who knew every trail before it had a name. She studied the newcomer with a steady gaze that made the younger woman feel as if her thoughts were laid bare. The Apache man greeted the elder with quiet respect. He spoke to her in his own language for a time, the words flowing low and steady. The woman answered with a tone that sounded less gentle. She glanced at the cabin, at the sled, at the stranger who had come in the night. Every now and then, her eyes narrowed in a way that said she did not trust what she could not explain. The younger woman shifted her weight, wishing she understood their words. She could tell from the elder's expression that this new arrangement did not sit easily with everyone. When they switched back to English, the tension in the air did not fade. The elder asked her name and where she had come from. The stranger answered plainly, giving the region but not naming the ranch. The elder listened and then said some folks ran because they were guilty. Some ran because they were hunted for telling the truth. She asked which one this was. The question struck hard. The younger woman swallowed and said she had left because she was tired of being bought, counted, and used as something less than a person. The elder's gaze softened just a little at that. She said the valley did not welcome cowards, but it had room for those who wanted to stand. Still, she warned, bringing a stranger into a place like this would cause talk among the Apache families nearby. They had lost enough 2 white men to be wary of any new face that came carrying their scent. The Apache man met the elder's eyes and said he would answer for the choice he had made. He spoke of the cabin, of the feeling that had driven him to build it, of the way the land felt different when the stranger walked into the firelight. The elder listened with her jaw set, then turned to study the younger woman once more. Something in her expression hinted she believed in such things, even if she did not like how they twisted old plans. Before leaving, the elder went to the ridge and looked out over the valley. She told them both that riders would not stay on the far side forever. She had seen dust on the horizon, the kind that meant men measuring the land with greedy eyes. She said when that time came, there would be no place for half choices. Either the valley would be held, or it would be taken. As the elder disappeared into the trees, the younger woman felt the world around her change shape. The conflict no longer belonged only to the Apache man. It reached outward, touching her, reaching toward the ranchers beyond the hills, a stirring fear among the Apache families who still lived along the river. She had stepped into something larger than her own escape. That night, as they sat at the table in the small cabin, the Apache man laid out the truth with the same careful patience he used when setting logs in the fire. He said he needed her help not as a servant but as a bridge. The ranchers would come with papers, laws, and claims. Most Apache in the valley did not read those papers. Many white ranchers did not listen when Apache spoke of what the land meant. He believed she had walked between both worlds long enough to understand each side's language, even if neither side had ever fully claimed her. She stared at him, startled by the weight of what he asked. She had always been the one pushed to the edge, the one told to clean up the mess, while others decided what mattered. Now he was asking her to stand in front of the coming storm and try to bend it. Her first instinct was to refuse. She told him she was no leader, no voice of law. He said he wasn't asking her to be. He was asking her to stay, to listen, to learn the valley the way he had learned it, and to help him read the moves of the men beyond the hills. Some conflicts, he said, were won long before the first shot, because someone understood where the true danger stood. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying faint sounds from the distant ridge. Whether it was the echo of riders or the cry of the land itself, she could not tell. Inside the cabin built just for her, she felt the pressure of choices building like storm clouds over the high plains. Sooner or later, someone would ride into this valley looking for land, for her or for both. And when that time came, she would have to decide whether to run again or stand. Beside the Apache man who had trusted her enough to build a future before, he knew her name. The next morning came with a sky bruised by dark clouds drifting low over the ridge. The air smelled of coming rain, sharp and earthy, as if the whole valley held its breath. She stepped outside the cabin and looked toward the distant hills where trouble waited like a shadow that would not move. The Apache man stood near the stream, his arms crossed, watching the horizon the same way a hunter watched for a storm that might swallow his trail. She walked down to him, boots crunching over frost and pine needles. He didn't turn, though he knew she was there. He said the wind had carried dust from the far side of the ridge at dawn. Fresh dust. Not from deer or elk, from horses. She felt her heartbeat stutter. He didn't need to say what that meant. The ranchers were closer. She asked how many. His jaw tightened. Then he said he did not know yet. Scouts would find out soon. That answer didn't comfort her, but what unsettled her more was the stillness in his shoulders. He didn't look scared, only focused. The way someone looked. When they had been waiting a long time for something they hoped would never come, they walked the land again that day. But his voice was quieter than before, his attention constantly shifting toward the ridges. She helped him check the old traps near the creek, gather roots, inspect the narrow trail leading deeper into the valley. Every place they went seemed to whisper the same warning. Things were changing. The land felt restless. Birds flew lower. Even the pines felt tighter, creaking as the wind brushed through them by midday. They returned to the cabin, and he asked her to sit at the table. His tone was different. Not demanding, not gentle. Something between. He told her there was more she needed to know before the riders arrived. He said the ranchers wanted the stream most of all. Water meant power, control, and profit. But the stream was also sacred to his people. Generations had gathered there, hunted nearby, and buried their elders along the higher stones. Taking the water would not only steal land, it would erase history. She listened, her fingers tightening against the rough wooden edge of the table. He explained that some of the ranchers had already begun spreading stories that the Apache were hoarding land they didn't use. That lie would make it easier for them to claim the valley through the county office. If they pushed harder, conflict would follow. Not all Apache in the region wanted war, but they would defend the valley if forced. He looked at her and said she had walked into the story at the worst time, and yet maybe at the right time too. She didn't understand. He didn't explain. Instead, he began preparing for something he could feel deep in his bones. For the next few days, tension grew like rising storm clouds. Scouts sent word that the ranchers had split into small groups, moving along different ridges. Some carried surveying tools. Others carried rifles. The Apache families near the river grew anxious. The elder woman returned twice, each time more stern than before. She spoke with the Apache man in low tones, her eyes always drifting to the stranger he had taken into the valley. The stranger felt the pressure in every breath. She tried to help wherever she could, but every task felt small compared to the weight of the coming storm. She gathered herbs, hauled wood, cleaned the cabin, and learned the narrow paths by heart. Yet nothing eased the tightness in her chest. She feared the ranchers were not just coming for land. They were coming for her. And if they found her here, they would drag the Apache into a fight they didn't deserve. One evening, as the light faded behind the ridge, he finally told her the truth she had been waiting for. He said he built the cabin for someone who needed a place to begin again, yes, but there was more. He said a man could feel when something in the land shifted, when a choice needed to be made. He started building the cabin long before word of the riders reached him. Something had pushed him to prepare, though he could not explain it better than that. She asked why he believed she was the one meant to fill that space. He said the moment she stepped into the fire's glow, he felt the valley ease, as if a piece had fallen into place. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being wanted in any place, let alone by the land itself. She had spent her life feeling like a burden drifting from one job to another. Before she could respond, another sound rolled through the valley, not the soft echo she had heard before. This time it was sharper, clearer, heavier, a distant crack of rifle fire. He stiffened and stepped outside at once. She followed, her heart hammering as the night swallowed their breath. The sound had come from the far ridge, not close enough to threaten them yet, but close enough to show the ranchers were testing the land. The Apache man scanned the dark, then motioned for her to stay near the cabin. Hours passed with hardly a word between them. He watched the ridge while she paced near the fire, trying to quiet her nerves. When the elder returned near midnight, she carried news. A fight had broken out farther down the valley. Nothing fatal, but enough to stir tempers. A rancher had fired into the air when an Apache scout refused to let him cross a thin trail that marked sacred ground. No one had been hurt. But the message was loud. The elder said the families were preparing to leave the valley for a few days, to gather near the river where they could stay together. But she also said some of the younger Apache wanted to stand their ground now. They were tired of running, tired of losing land, tired of watching promises break like twigs under boots. The Apache man listened, but his eyes kept drifting toward the stranger standing near the cabin door. The elder noticed and frowned, then asked whether the woman had told him everything about why she came. He glanced at the stranger and said her troubles were tied to the ranchers too, though not by her doing. The elder's expression hardened. She warned that some Apache might blame. The new arrival, if trouble grew worse, the stranger felt the elder's gaze cut into her like cold wind. She wanted to step back, but she held still. She didn't want to run again. Not this time. Not from these people. Not from the man who had offered her a place before knowing her past, after the elder left. The Apache man turned to her and asked the question she had been dreading. He asked what the rancher truly wanted from her. She hesitated, then told him everything. The debt, the unwanted attention, the threats, the way the owner had treated her like property, the way he believed she belonged to him because he had offered her bread and boots. The Apache man's jaw clenched, but he didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with the steady intensity of someone who saw a truth more clearly now. He said the rancher was not chasing her because she owed him. He was chasing her because men like that could not stand losing control. As soon as he said it, something in her broke loose. The guilt she carried, the fear, the shame, all tangled in her chest. She asked him if she should leave the valley to avoid bringing danger to his people. He shook his head firmly. He said leaving would not stop the ranchers. They wanted the valley no matter what. Her disappearance wouldn't change their hunger, but staying might change the course of the fight. His words didn't comfort her, but they gave her strength she didn't know she had. She spent that night awake, staring at the rough beams of the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge alone. It felt like a line drawn in the sand. The climax began to build the next morning. The scouts returned with news. The ranchers had split into two groups. One group moved toward the creek. The other, smaller but faster, was headed straight for the ridge above the cabin. She froze when she heard that. The ridge above the cabin was the one she first saw lit by firelight the night she arrived. The Apache man grabbed, his bow and knife, his movements sharp and purposeful. He said they needed to leave the cabin for now. The ranchers would use the high ground to watch the valley. If they spotted her, everything would change in an instant. She nodded, though fear pressed hard against her ribs. They packed quickly. The air tasted tense. Birds refused to sing. Even the stream felt quieter than usual, as if it sensed danger creeping closer. As they stepped away from the cabin, she turned back for a moment. The small shelter looked different now. Not just a home. A target, a promise. A secret built too close to rising danger. He touched her shoulder gently and told her they would return when the land allowed it. She followed him into the trees, deeper into the valley, where shadows grew thicker and paths narrower. Behind them, high on the ridge, a faint shape moved between the pines. A rider. And the cabin he had built just for her sat silent below. The hidden heart of a storm drawing closer with each breath of wind. They moved deeper into the valley with careful steps, following a narrow trail that wound through thick pines and jagged stone. The Apache man walked ahead, silent but alert, his eyes tracking every shift in the branches, every rustle in the brush. She kept close behind him, her breath held tight in her chest. The ridge behind them felt heavier with each step they took, as if the rider above watched not just the land, but her. By the time they reached a small ravine sheltered by tall cliffs, the wind had picked up, tugging at her coat and carrying the distant sound of hoofbeats. They crouched beneath a fallen tree, hidden from view. He motioned for her to stay low and whispered that they could not go farther until the scouts confirmed the riders had moved on. She nodded, though her heart felt like it was beating loud enough for the whole ridge to hear. Time stretched. The ravine felt too quiet, too tight. She kept glancing upward, imagining the rancher's face if he saw her again. She thought of the cabin waiting behind them, the table, the quilt, the second chair. Everything made for a life she had barely stepped into. She wondered if she would ever see it again, or if the cabin would now become nothing more than a silent witness to conflict. When the Apache scout appeared, he moved like a shadow through the trees. He knelt beside them and spoke quickly. The riders had reached the far edge of the ridge. They were studying the valley from a distance, but hadn't seen the cabin hidden below. More ranchers were gathering beyond the hills, though. Trouble was coming fast. The Apache man listened without blinking. Then he nodded and stood, helping her rise. They followed the scout toward the river, where several Apache families had gathered. Smoke from their campfires curled gently against the gray sky. Children stayed close to their mothers, elders sat in quiet circles, and the men stood watching the ridge with narrowed eyes. The whole community felt like a single pulse, waiting for the beat to change. When she entered the camp beside the Apache man, conversations grew hushed. Not everyone trusted her presence, but no one turned her away either. The elder woman stepped forward, her face stern as stone. She asked the Apache man if he was sure about bringing the stranger into the heart of their gathering. He answered that she had become part of the valley's story, whether she chose it or not. The elder studied the younger woman for a long moment, then nodded and motioned for them to sit near the fire. The flames warmed her hands, but her nerves stayed tight. She listened as the Apache leaders talked about the ranchers, about the push for land, about the choices left before them. Some wanted to prepare for a fight. Others believed there was still time to settle the matter without bloodshed. The Apache man remained quiet until the elder asked for his view. He said force might stop the riders for a day, maybe two, but it would not end the hunger behind them. The only chance for peace was to confront the ranchers before they claimed the valley through the county office. The elder frowned. Knowing the weight of such a task, the ranchers had influence, money, and men who carried rifles without hesitation. Standing against them openly could mean great risk, but letting them advance would mean the end of everything the valley protected. She shifted uneasily, feeling the eyes of several Apache fall on her. She understood then what the Apache man meant when he said she could be the bridge. The ranchers did not listen to men they viewed as outsiders. But she understood both worlds, even if neither had fully accepted her. She swallowed hard and found her voice. She told the elders everything about the rancher who hunted her. She explained the debt he claimed she owed, the lies he used to control people, the way he dismissed Apache rights as if they were fading ink on forgotten paper. She said men like him would twist any story they needed to if it meant gaining land. The elders listened closely. Some nodded with empathy, others with anger. But all of them understood her meaning. The Apache man added that the cabin he had built was not only for shelter, but for proof. Proof that the valley had purpose, that people lived and worked there with intention, not as squatters but as caretakers. The ranchers wanted to argue the land was unused. The cabin proved otherwise. The elder's eyes softened with something close to respect. She said if they were to stand against the ranchers in the county meeting, they needed someone the ranchers could not dismiss. Someone who would speak plainly and truthfully. Someone who had lived under their rules and still chose to stand with the valley. The younger woman felt her breath catch. She knew the elder meant her. The next day, they prepared for the journey to the county office, a place miles beyond the hills where decisions about land were written into law. She didn't feel ready, but she didn't run. The Apache man walked beside her, steady as ever. Their path took them through rough terrain, across the creek, and along a narrow route that led back toward civilization. The closer they came to the town, the tighter her chest grew. But with every step, she reminded herself that running had never protected her before. When they reached the county office, the ranchers were already gathered outside. The owner she had once worked for stood at the front of them, arms crossed, smug smile fixed on his face. That smile faltered when he saw her step out of the shadows beside the Apache man. He tried to speak first, ordering her to return with him, claiming she still owed him. She lifted her chin and said she owed him nothing. She told the county clerk every truth she had carried for months. She told them how he manipulated workers, how he moved fences without permission, how he threatened people who stood in his way. She told them he wanted the valley not because it was unused, but because he believed no one would challenge him. Her voice didn't shake, not even once. The Apache man stepped forward after her. He placed documents on the clerk's desk, records of old agreements, land maps, evidence that his family had lived in the valley long before the ranchers came. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply told the truth with the quiet strength of someone who trusted the land more than the men who claimed to own it. The clerk reviewed the papers, listened to both sides, and finally ruled that the valley belonged to the Apache community and was not for sale. The ranchers had no authority to enter or claim the land. The decision was final. The owner's face turned red with frustration. He glared at her, hatred burning in his eyes, but she didn't look away. She stood firm beside the Apache man until the ranchers mounted their horses and rode off, defeated and furious, but powerless. When the dust settled and the valley was safe again, they returned to the cabin. The sight of it waiting in the quiet pines sent warmth through her chest. She stepped inside. Feeling the familiar glow of the small stove and the comfort of the space he had built with his own hands, she turned to him, sure of what came next. He looked at her with the same calm steadiness he had held since the night she arrived. He told her she no longer had to wander. The valley was her home now, if she wished it. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a beginning. Her eyes filled with relief she had held back for far too long. She walked to the table, touched the second chair, and finally understood why it had been there. Not as a placeholder, but as a promise. She stayed in the valley. She worked alongside the Apache families, learning their ways, tending the land, and helping keep peace when new disputes arose. The ranchers did not return. Word spread that the county had made its ruling. No one wanted to challenge it again. Seasons passed, and the cabin grew richer with memories. She planted flowers near the porch. He added new shelves, a bigger stove, and a small corral nearby. The valley no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a future. In time, people from nearby settlements began to see the valley differently. Not as empty land, not as disputed ground, but as a place where two worlds had learned to stand together. And whenever travelers asked how a woman like her ended up deep in Apache country, she always smiled softly and said the answer started on a quiet night when she came seeking work and found something else. Waiting instead, she found peace. He found someone the land had chosen. And the cabin he'd built just for her became the heart of a story that no storm, no rancher, and no ridge rider could ever take away.